Good morning. Welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
The last place left. The nights on Mesa Lodge became the only place in town with light. A 17-year-old girl stood in a furnace-hot hallway with grease on her hands, smoke in the air, and 50 frightened people waiting on a machine everyone else had already given up on. Her name was Tessa Rayner, and just 3 days earlier, this broken motel had been nothing but a dead-end ruin at the edge of a desert town that had already decided she would fail. This story is about learning how to recognize hidden value, how pain can sharpen courage, and how the people the world overlooks are sometimes the very ones who see a way forward before anyone else does. By the time Tessa first saw Sun Mesa Lodge, the heat had already turned mean. It was the kind of Arizona border heat that did not simply press on your skin. It entered your lungs. It dried your eyes. It made the horizon shimmer like the whole world was trying to disappear. The bus driver had barely slowed down before opening the door. "This is you," he said. Tessa looked out at the road, then at the motel sitting a little way off the highway, crooked and faded beneath a washed-out blue sky. The sign leaned to one side. A few of the letters were missing, Sun Mesa L _ DGE. The empty pool out front was cracked like old pottery, and the stucco walls had peeled so badly the place looked sunburned. She stepped down with one duffel bag, a paper envelope, and the feeling, cold and sharp inside her chest, that there was no one left in the world who planned on coming back for her. The bus pulled away in a gust of dust and heat. For a moment, she just stood there. 17 years old, no car, no money worth talking about, no mother, no father who could save her, and now no home that still wanted her. She opened the envelope because she needed to do something with her hands. Inside was a single key on a brass ring and a short note in her stepfather's rush-block handwriting. "Your uncle left the property in your name. Don't ask me for anything else." That was all. No apology, no explanation, not even good luck. Tessa folded the note back up with careful fingers. Like if she moved too fast, the anger inside her might crack open and spill everywhere. Then she picked up her bag and started walking. The gravel popped under her sneakers. Cicadas screamed from somewhere near the scrub brush. A rusted Coke machine stood dead beside the motel office. One of the windows had been boarded up. Another was spiderwebbed from an old crack. The front door stuck halfway before she forced it open with her shoulder. The air inside was stale, baked, and dusty, but cooler than outside by a few degrees. That alone felt like mercy. She stood in the office and let her eyes adjust. A counter, a wall of mail slots, a yellowed map of Arizona, a chipped ceramic bowl with old room keys, a calendar from 4 summers ago, still hanging open to July. It was ugly, it was forgotten, it was hers. That last thought landed strangely. Not comforting, not exactly, just heavy. Tessa moved through the building slowly, room by room, like she was walking through the bones of somebody else's life. Most of the motel rooms were stripped bare. A few still had sagging mattresses. One had curtains printed with faded orange flowers that must have looked cheerful 20 years earlier. Another still held a Bible in the nightstand and a plastic cup wrapped in paper. The place had not been abandoned all at once. It had thinned out, dried up, been left behind piece by piece. That, more than anything, made her chest ache, because she understood that kind of leaving. Out back, she found the old utility area. There was a water tank, rusted but standing, a maintenance shed with shelves of cracked tools, a generator room, half underground, with an old diesel unit sitting silent in the dark like some sleeping animal no one had bothered to wake. Tessa crouched beside it and brushed dust off the metal housing. Her father, Wam, the only good thing her early childhood had given her, had fixed air conditioners, pumps, and broken appliances for a living. He used to tell her, "People throw things away because they stop listening. Machines talk before they die." At 10 years old, she had thought that sounded magical. At 17, kneeling in a dead motel at the edge of nowhere, it sounded like the only useful thing anyone had ever taught her. She checked the fuel line with her fingers, looked at the belt, opened the side panel. "Maybe," she whispered, not to the machine, to herself. By sunset, the heat still clung to the walls. Tessa locked the office, dragged a lawn chair into one of the cleaner rooms, and ate half a pack of crackers from her bag. When darkness settled over the desert, the motel changed. It stopped looking pathetic and started looking lonely. There was a difference. She could hear trucks in the distance on the highway, a dog barking somewhere across town, wind rubbing grit against the windows. Then came a knock at the office door. Tessa froze. When she opened it, an older woman with silver hair, hard eyes, and a takeout bag in one hand stood under the weak porch light. "I'm Mabel Quinn," she said. "I own the diner 2 blocks over. Somebody saw a girl get dropped here alone." Tessa said nothing. Mabel held up the bag. "It's a burger and iced tea. Don't make me stand out here all night acting generous." Tessa took it. "Thank you." Mabel studied her face for a moment, the way older women sometimes do when they've lived long enough to recognize hurt on sight. "This town won't be easy on you," she said, "and that motel sure won't save itself." Then she glanced past Tessa into the dim office. "Still," she added more quietly, "sometimes the last place left is the one that tells you who you are." After she left, Tessa sat on the floor with the paper bag in her lap and listened to the old building settle around her. Outside, Sun Mesa Lodge looked like a ruin. Inside, in the dark, with dust in the air and a dead generator waiting downstairs, Tessa felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not safety, not hope, but a reason to stay until morning. And sometimes, for a girl with nowhere else to go, that was how survival began. She saw what others missed. The next morning, Tessa woke before sunrise, stiff from sleeping in a lawn chair, with a crick in her neck and the dry taste of dust still sitting in her mouth. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the faded curtains, the cracked lamp base, the weak line of desert light pushing through the window, and it all came back. Sun Mesa Lodge, the empty highway, the note, the silence. She sat up slowly and listened. No voices, no traffic close by, just the low hum of heat already building outside, as if the whole day had started warming itself before the sun was even fully up. Tessa stood, tied her hair back, and walked out into the office barefoot, carrying the old motel key in one hand, like she still needed proof this place belonged to her. In daylight, the building looked worse. The stucco was flaking in long strips. The walkway railings were rusted through in places. The pool looked like a giant broken bowl dropped into the dirt. And yet, the bones were still there. That was what caught her attention. The roofline over the front office still held strong. The cinder block walls were thick. The lower levels stayed cooler than the rooms above. The maintenance system, while old, had been built for hard weather and long summers. This place was not dead. It was wounded, neglected, dismissed. That was different. She spent the morning going room to room with a pencil and the back of an old receipt pad, making a list. Broken locks, working sinks, cracked windows, loose wiring. Rooms with shade longest in the afternoon. Rooms that could hold cots. Rooms with space enough for families if things got bad. That last thought made her stop writing. If things got bad, she looked out across the highway toward the town. Even from a distance, it felt tired. The gas station awning down the road flickered on and off. A church sign read, "Pray for rain," though everyone knew prayer alone would not cool the pavement. The heat wave had already settled over the valley like a lid. People were moving slower, talking shorter, watching the sky for trouble that never looked like clouds. By noon, Tessa was in the generator room again. She wiped down the casing, checked the panel, followed the old fuel line with careful fingers. The generator was not in good shape, but it was not hopeless either. One hose had gone brittle. A belt looked worn. The filter housing needed cleaning, but the machine itself, the heart of it, still felt solid. She could almost hear her father's voice. "Don't panic first, look first. Most problems tell on themselves." Tessa let out a long breath and kept working. Around 1 o'clock, she heard a bike skid to a stop outside. A minute later, a teenage boy with a lean frame, sun-browned skin, and a Cubs cap with a broken brim appeared in the doorway. He looked about 16, maybe younger if he smiled, though he was not smiling now. "You really live here?" he asked. Tessa straightened up. "Looks that way." He glanced around the room, then at the tools near her feet. "People said you were squatting." "I'm not." He gave a short shrug. "People around here say a lot." That almost made her smile. He stepped closer and looked at the open panel on the generator. "That thing run?" "Not yet. But you think it can?" Tessa hesitated, then nodded once. "Maybe." The boy studied her for another second, then stuck out his hand. "Noah Bell. Tessa Rayner." He pointed toward the motel courtyard. "You know, everybody says this place is done for, right?" Tessa looked past him, out toward the cracked pool and the empty rooms baking in the sun. "Yes," she said. "That's probably why no one noticed what still works." That answer seemed to land somewhere in him. For the next 2 hours, Noah stayed. He handed her tools without talking too much. dragged out a busted floor fan from a storage closet, found a box of old rags, climbed a ladder to check an exterior vent. He was quick, curious, restless in the way boys often are when life has taught them not to expect steadiness from adults. By late afternoon, they had cleaned the generator room, flushed sediment out of part of the water line, and opened enough windows in the shaded rooms to let trapped heat escape. It still was not much, but it was movement, and movement mattered. Just before sunset, a sheriff's department SUV rolled up in front of the office. Noah muttered, "Well, that'll be Deputy Ortega." A tall man in his 30s stepped out, broad-shouldered, sun-tired, wearing mirrored sunglasses and the look of someone who had seen too many small-town emergencies to be impressed by one more. He walked in, glanced at the mess, then at Tessa. "We got a call," he said. "Said a miner was tearing apart old property near the highway." Tessa wiped her hands on a rag. "I'm not tearing it apart." Deputy Luis Ortega looked at the cleaned parts on the workbench, the organized tools, the notepad full of room numbers and repairs, then back at her face. "No," he said after a pause. "Doesn't look like you are." His voice softened just slightly, still cautious, still skeptical, but no longer dismissive. "What exactly are you trying to do here, Tessa?" She glanced past him toward the motel rooms glowing orange in the last of the evening light. For a moment, she thought about giving the easy answer. "Fix it up, stay out of trouble, get by." But the truth came out instead. "I think this place could help people," she said quietly. "If the power starts going out for real." Deputy Ortega did not laugh. That surprised her more than anything. He took off his sunglasses. "That's a pretty big idea." Tessa nodded. "So is this heat." He stood there for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was brave, foolish, or something in between. Then he said, "Well, don't set yourself on fire trying to prove a point." After he left, the sky darkened into deep desert blue, and for the first time since arriving, Tessa no longer felt like she was just surviving inside an abandoned motel. She felt like she was beginning to see it, not for what it had been, for what it could become. When the heat turned cruel, by the third day, the heat no longer felt like weather. It felt personal. It came early, stayed late, and pressed against the town with the kind of ruthless force that made people short-tempered, tired-eyed, and a little less kind than they meant to be. Even the wind felt wrong. It carried no relief. Only grit, dry weeds, and the smell of hot asphalt rising off Route 80. At Sun Mesa Lodge, Tessa had stopped thinking in terms of comfort. Now she thought in terms of function. Which rooms stayed coolest after noon? Which faucets still pushed out a steady stream? Which doors locked? Which windows needed blankets pinned over them to block the afternoon sun? She and Noah worked side by side without wasting words. He dragged old mattresses into the shade and stripped them down to anything usable. She cleaned out 2 connected rooms near the office and turned them into a place people could actually rest. Together, they hauled out a stack of folding chairs from storage, rinsed dust from plastic pitchers, and set up the lobby like they were preparing for guests no motel had seen in years. Only these would not be guests. These would be people with nowhere cooler to go. Just after lunch, the first full outage hit the east side of town. No warning, no slow dimming, just a hard cut. The diner lost power. The gas station pump stopped. The church office went dark. And by mid-afternoon, even from the motel, Tessa could hear the uneasy change in the town sound. Less machinery, more sirens. More voices raised across parking lots. Noah came in through the office door, sweat darkening the back of his t-shirt. "Deputy Ortega's over at the pharmacy," he said. "They're trying to move medicine into coolers." Tessa looked toward the generator room. The machine had coughed to life twice that morning, then died again. She had gotten farther than before, but not far enough for trust. "Not yet." She wiped her forehead with her wrist. "What about the clinic?" Noah shook his head. "Dr. Hart's there. She said the backup's old too." A silence passed between them. Not empty, heavy. Because now the idea Tessa had spoken aloud 2 days earlier was no longer just an idea. The town really was starting to buckle. An hour later, a dusty pickup stopped hard outside the motel. Deputy Luis Ortega stepped out first. Beside him was Dr. Evelyn Hart, her pale blue scrubs wrinkled, her face flushed and drawn with the strain of too many decisions and not enough time. In the back seat sat an older woman with an oxygen tank at her feet, and beside her, a little girl holding a damp washcloth to her neck. Luis came through the office door already talking. "The clinic lost its cooling system," he said. "Not everything, but enough. We need a place for a few people to wait out the worst part of the day." Tessa's heartbeat kicked once, hard. This was it. Not someday, not maybe, now. She glanced down the hallway she and Noah had scrubbed clean that morning. It's not perfect, she said. Dr. Hart gave her a tired look that carried both worry and gratitude. Honey, today perfect is not the standard. That was all it took. Within 20 minutes, the first room was occupied. The older woman was settled near the window with a box fan running off an extension line from the generator circuit Tessa had barely managed to stabilize. The little girl lay on top of the bedspread with a cold bottle of water against her wrists. Another mother came in with a baby whose cheeks were flushed bright pink from the heat. Then a man with chest pain. Then two stranded truckers who had been sleeping in their cab with no air conditioning until one of them nearly passed out. The old motel began filling not with noise but with need. Quiet need, fragile need, the kind that changed the air in a room. Dr. Hart turned one room into a makeshift medical check area. Noah posted up by the office with a legal pad and wrote down names like he had worked disaster response his whole life. Deputy Ortega brought in cases of bottled water from somewhere. Mabel Quinn arrived 30 minutes later with sandwiches, paper cups, and the same sharp expression she always wore when she was worried and did not want anyone to notice. Well, she said, looking around the lobby, I see we've officially become the last decent idea in town. Tessa almost laughed, but she was too tired. Outside, the sun leaned lower, but the heat barely let up. The sky had gone hard and white over the hills. Somewhere to the west, a brush fire had started in the dry grass outside county lines. No one knew yet whether it would turn. Inside Sun Mesa Lodge, the air was tense, humming, improvised. And underneath it all, like a weak heartbeat trying to prove it still belonged in the world, the old generator kept running. Not smoothly, not confidently, but running. Tessa crouched beside the side panel that evening, listening to every tremor in the motor. She could feel the pressure building all around her now. Not just from the heat, from responsibility. These were no longer empty rooms and repair lists. There were children drinking the last of the cold water. An old woman breathing easier because the fan still worked. People leaning on this place because they had run out of cooler, safer, better options. And for the first time since she arrived, Tessa was afraid. Not of failing herself, of failing them. Then Noah appeared in the generator room doorway, his voice lower than usual. Tessa, he said, you better come see this. She stood and followed him outside. Far beyond the highway, past the gas station and the church sign and the scattered roofs of town, a dark line was rising along the western ridge. Smoke, not thick yet, but real. And as they stood there in the burning orange light of early evening, the motel sign behind them flickered once, then twice, as if the whole place knew what was coming. Tessa stared at the horizon, then back at the people moving inside those old rooms. The heat was no longer the only danger. And Sun Mesa Lodge was no longer just shelter. It was becoming a promise she might have to fight to keep. The night she refused to run. By nightfall, the fire had not reached town, but fear had. You could feel it in the way people spoke too fast, in the way mothers kept counting their children, in the way every sound from the old motel generator made the whole hallway go still for half a second. Sun Mesa Lodge was full now. Not with travelers, not with vacationers, but with people carrying paper bags of medicine, half-charged phones, crying babies, and that stunned, fragile look people get when life changes faster than they can keep up. The lobby smelled like sweat, dust, bottled water, and burned coffee from a machine Mabel had somehow bullied back into service. Dr. Hart moved from room to room with calm hands and exhausted eyes. Deputy Ortega worked the front like a man trying to keep order without letting panic take the wheel. Noah ran supplies, checked doors, and filled pitchers, as if staying busy could keep fear from catching him. And beneath it all, in the utility room below, the generator rattled on like an old heart refusing to quit. Tessa heard the change before anyone else did. A rougher knock in the rhythm, a catch in the cycle, then a metal shutter that rolled through the floor under her sneakers. She froze in the hallway. Number. Not now. Not with an older woman finally asleep under a fan. Not with a baby cooled down enough to stop crying. Not with smoke thickening over the western ridge. She was already moving before she fully realized it. Crossing the lobby, slipping past the stacked water cases, and heading for the stairs to the lower level. Tessa, Noah called after her. She did not stop. The utility room felt 10 degrees hotter than the rest of the building. The air was close, oily, and loud with machine noise. She knelt beside the side panel, opened it fast, and saw the problem almost immediately. A fuel line connection had loosened under the vibration. Not broken, but bad enough. Fuel had started to spit and drip along the metal housing. If it got worse, the engine would choke out. If it sparked, she did not let herself finish that thought. Upstairs, footsteps pounded on the stairs. Deputy Ortega appeared first, ducking under the frame. "Tell me what you need," he said. Tessa looked up, sweat running down the side of her face. "I need light, a wrench, clean rags, and I need everyone upstairs to stay calm." Luis glanced at the leaking line and went still for one hard second. Then he nodded. Behind him, Noah started down the steps two at a time. "I can help." "No." Tessa's voice came out sharper than she expected. Noah stopped. She looked at him, gentled her tone, and tried again. "I need you upstairs. Help Dr. Hart. Keep water moving. Keep people back from this room." He hated it. She could see that. The restless, loyal, stubborn part of him wanted to stay, wanted to prove he could do more. But for the first time since they met, he saw something in her face that made him listen. So he nodded once and ran back up. Luis handed her the wrench. "You sure you can do this?" Tessa swallowed hard. No, she thought, but that wasn't the same thing as stopping. "I have to." The line trembled under her fingers as she tightened the fitting. The metal was hot. The smell of diesel burned her nose. Her hands slipped once and her stomach dropped so hard she thought she might be sick. Then she heard her father again. Not like a ghost, not like magic, just memory. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Listen to the machine before you fight it. Panic makes people stupid." Tessa closed her eyes for one breath. Then she opened them and worked. Above them, the motel carried on in strained, uneven waves of sound. A child coughing, someone praying softly. Mabel's voice telling somebody to sit down and drink their water before she gave them a reason to regret ignoring her. The old building held all of it. Human worry, human need, human hope hanging by a wire. A few minutes later, Wade Cutter showed up in the doorway with a red fuel can in one hand and a toolbox in the other. For a moment, Tessa honestly thought the heat was making her hallucinate. Wade looked at the open panel, then at her. "Ortega said you've got half the town breathing because of this thing," he muttered. "Figured that made it my business." His voice still had gravel in it, still had pride, but the mockery was gone. He set the can down and crouched beside the backup line without waiting to be asked. That was the moment everything changed. Not because the fire vanished, not because the danger passed, but because the people who had doubted her were finally standing inside the truth she had seen first. Together they tightened the line, flushed the feed, checked the pressure, and restarted the cycle. The generator coughed once, twice, then caught. A deep, steady rumble filled the room. Not perfect, not pretty, but alive. Upstairs, the lights flickered, dipped, then held. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the cheer came down through the floorboards like a wave. Small at first, then bigger. A tired, cracked, grateful sound from people who had spent the last hour bracing for the dark. Tessa sat back on the concrete floor, her hands black with grease, her arms shaking from exhaustion. Luis let out a breath and leaned against the wall. Wade wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. Near dawn, Tessa stepped outside alone. The desert sky was smoky and red at the edges. Far off, the hills still glowed where the fire line had moved north. The air tasted scorched. Her legs felt weak. Her shirt clung to her back. She looked like a girl who had been dropped at the end of the world and forgotten there. But behind her, Sun Mesa Lodge was still lit, still standing, still sheltering, still holding. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa understood something deeper than survival. Sometimes courage did not look like charging forward. Sometimes it looked like staying put when everyone else was ready to run. The place they almost threw away. By morning, the fire had shifted north. It had not swallowed the town. It had not taken Sun Mesa Lodge. And somehow, against every expectation people had whispered only days before, the old motel was still standing with its lights on. The sky over the desert looked pale and bruised, streaked with smoke and early sunlight. Everything outside seemed tired. The road, the dry brush, the faded motel sign. Even the wind had lost some of its anger. Inside, people were waking slowly. A baby who had cried half the night was finally sleeping against his mother's shoulder. The older woman with the oxygen tank was sitting up, stronger now, with a blanket around her lap and a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Children who had come in frightened and overheated were sitting cross-legged on the lobby floor, drawing on the backs of old motel brochures with a jar of pens Noah had found in the office. It was not beautiful in the polished kind of way. It was better than that. It was real. Tessa stood near the front walkway with a mug of coffee Mabel had pressed into her hand. The cup was too hot, her body was too tired, and her hands still carried grease under her nails no matter how many times she washed them. She looked out at the parking lot. Only a few mornings earlier, she had arrived there with one duffel bag, one key, and the aching certainty that she had been left behind for good. Now people were stepping around her gently, looking at her differently. Not with pity, not with doubt, but with something she had not expected to earn so quickly. Respect. Deputy Luis Ortega walked out to join her, his uniform wrinkled, his face drawn from too little sleep. "County says the worst of it passed us," he said. "Cleanup's gonna be rough, but we made it." Tessa nodded. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Luis glanced back at the motel. "You know," he said, "there's already talk about keeping this place open. Officially." Tessa looked at him. "As a motel?" He gave a tired smile. "Maybe partly, but more than that. Cooling center, emergency shelter, supply point if we need one again." She stared at the building, at the peeling paint, at the rusted railings, at the rooms that had held fear, prayer, exhaustion, relief, and somehow enough life to carry people through the night. Sun Mesa Lodge had not changed because it became perfect. It had changed because someone stayed long enough to see what it could still be. A truck pulled into the lot. Wade Cutter stepped out with lumber tied in the back and a toolbox riding beside him. He saw Tessa watching and lifted one shoulder in the closest thing he had to an apology. "Front awning's loose," he muttered. "Figured I'd fix it before it falls on somebody." Tessa almost smiled. "Free of charge?" she asked. He snorted. "Don't get used to it." A few minutes later, Mabel came out carrying a long wrapped object under her arm. She set it against the office wall and pulled away the paper. It was a freshly painted wooden sign. The letters were bold, steady, and clean. Sun Mesa Lodge. Anon Telier Pensionage. Underneath, in smaller words, Mabel had added, "When the heat came, this place held." Tessa just stared at it. Her throat tightened so suddenly she had to look away. Noah came to stand beside her, hands shoved in his pockets, trying and failing to act casual. "Looks better than the old one," he said. "Yeah," Tessa answered softly. "It does." But what she really meant was something deeper. It wasn't just the sign. It was the feeling underneath it. For the first time in a long while, this place did not look abandoned. And for the first time in even longer, neither did she. Dr. Hart later claimed one of the downstairs rooms for emergency medical supplies. Luis said he would talk to the county about getting backup support routed through the motel. Mabel started talking about stocking canned food and bottled water in the office closet for common sense, since apparently common sense skipped town before all of us. And Noah kept showing up like he belonged there. Maybe because now he did. As the sun climbed higher, people slowly returned home, or to whatever shape home would take after a week like this. Cars pulled out, doors closed. The parking lot grew quiet again. But it was not the old kind of quiet. Not empty, not hopeless. Just peaceful. Tessa stood on the front steps and looked across the road, out toward the dry hills and the wide American sky stretching over everything. A few days ago, she had been a girl people assumed would disappear. Another burden, another sad story, another kid life had pushed too far. But that was not who she was. She was observant, resilient, steady-hearted, resourceful in ways nobody had bothered to notice until they needed what she could do. And maybe that was the lesson buried inside all of this. Sometimes the thing people throw away is the very thing that saves them later. Sometimes the place everyone calls worthless is the place that holds when everything else breaks. And sometimes the person the world overlooks is the first one to see a way through. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever felt like life pushed you into some forgotten corner and expected you to fade there? And if you have, could it be that your greatest strength is still hiding in the very place other people gave up on? If this story stayed with you, and if you believe quiet courage still matters in this world, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story. Because sometimes hope doesn't arrive looking grand or powerful. Sometimes it looks like an old motel, a stubborn girl and one light that refused to go out.